Hello and welcome back to Season 6 of the Rogue Monkey podcast. We're not sure how it's already May and we've already released 16 shows this year. If you're new to the podcast, we exist to share stories that will inspire you, and there really is no limits to the different fields that we delve into. Season 6 features professional athletes, activists, writers, teachers and TV presenters. Certainly a real mix across the next 8 shows. Stay up to date on all our social media pages, as we will be rolling out more content over the coming months. Just search for the Rogue Monkey podcast across Twitter, Instagram, Facebook and LinkedIn. So, kicking off Season 6, and we're going to have a wonderful conversation today with Lucy McCrudden, founder of The Dance Mama and a self-confessed entrepreneur in the field of dance. Today we explore Lucy's journey, how she forged her own path, overcoming plenty of hurdles along the way, and ultimately how both confidence and patience has allowed her to succeed in an area she is super passionate about. So, let's get into it, and episode 41 of the Rogue Monkey podcast. Taking to the stage and making it happen. The journey of the dance mama, Lucy McCrudden. Hello Lucy, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hi Kevin, thank you so much for having me on. I'm really excited and privileged to be here, so thanks for having me.
Well, it's going to be a fun half hour as we explore your journey, but just to give us a bit of a headline start and an introduction to who you are, who's Lucy and what do you do?
I'm Lucy McCrudden and I'm the dance mama. Basically, I'm an advocate and entrepreneur working in the dance sector and a little bit beyond. I guess that's me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. Well, I'm assuming we don't get to that point and that wasn't the starting point. So, you know, where was it? School, college? Where did this passion for dance and kind of journey into this world start?
I think it started quite early on, as in the womb, which I've only kind of really, that's only just actually come to me, which is strange. My parents, I'm from Warwickshire originally, Stratford-upon-Avon, and they were in what was known then as an amateur operatic society at the RST. So it wasn't kind of just a local village hall. They got to perform once or twice a year on the main stage there in a amateur, or as we'd say now, recreational capacity. And my mum was pregnant with me when they did a show called La Belle Hélène. So actually, I think that might have had a little bit to do with it. And growing up in that town anyway, you know, everybody who lives there thinks sort of Shakespeare is the centre of the universe, pretty much, and the theatre. So that had quite a big influence on me. Also, my sister was in a local dance school, and I remember seeing her dance and thinking, I want a piece of that. So I started dancing when I was 4 at my local school in what I call the Holy Trinity of dance styles, which is Ballet, Tap and Modern, which very much still exists today, although there is a lot more diversity in style now, which is great. But having a really good dance school and a world-class theatre on my doorstep, which actually up until I was born, the Royal Ballet used to perform at on tour, which sadly I arrived on the scene just after they stopped doing that, really influenced me so much that I then started my professional career aged 8 with the Royal Shakespeare Company. Yeah, and actually it's quite poignant this week because I was in a production called Showboat, which I actually only found out as an adult was the first time the Royal Shakespeare Company collaborated with Opera North. And there was only myself and another girl playing the only child's role in it. So we had a really good time. But Trevor Peacock played my granddad, and you might know him as Jim Trott of Vicar of Dibley and loads of other things. Amazing actor, but he passed away this week. So it's actually been quite a poignant week this week. I mean, past 8 years old, I didn't know Trevor, but it's been quite a poignant week in that way, and just reflecting back on that. So yeah, the journey started really early. We could absolutely say in the womb, but definitely from 4 years old in terms of getting going with dance training, and then 8, and then between 4 and 18 with that operatic society, combined with a couple of other musical theatre groups for young people, Stratford Music Centre, I must have done about 30 amateur musicals before I went to train professionally on a scholarship.
See, I think, and we talk a lot to different athletes, and divers are one of the group we tend to talk to that tend to start quite early in gymnasts. But what was the standard, if you like, academic experience, kind of primary school, secondary school age band when you're trying to do all of these things? Because I think a lot of people see the end product and perhaps don't see everything else that goes on behind the scenes. And obviously school is a heavily stressful time, as we know, for teenagers. So what was that like with those two worlds coming together?
I think in general, it was quite supportive. So I went to a state primary, and then I went to a state grammar school for girls. And again, being in a town where drama is at the heart of a lot of things in terms of history, but also tourism for Stratford. I mean, you couldn't walk down the road as a child without, being met by crowds of international tourists. That was quite a regular experience, actually. It was quite supportive. So for showboat, so I would have been 8, I had to have a license and that kind of thing, and time off school. And I remember my headmaster, Eric Davis, being really supportive. And actually that production was only 3 weeks long. I then managed, I haven't quite scored the hat trick, but I managed to go back to the RSC again, aged 11, in a production of Merry Wives of Windsor, and that Merry Wives of Windsor. And that was probably around 5 or 6 months long when I was in my first year of secondary school. So absolutely, there was an impact for that, definitely in my year 7 exams, because I'd spent most of the year, at least 3 nights a week, backstage and on stage, having a whale of a time, and of course trying to get homework done, although we used to sit around in a group and do it, and tiredness and things like that wasn't always conducive to an end of year great grade result. However, navigating through school and GCSEs and A levels, going to quite a more traditional academic school where there was a track record for girls going to Oxford and Cambridge, and going into drama and theatre. I can think of a couple of former pupils who are sort of in and around my age. Laura Cubitt, who's a movement director, was a couple of years above me. Hannah Young, who's an actor for Royal Shakespeare Company and lots of other companies. There was also a little bit of tradition then. We had a fantastic drama teacher called Pat Friday, who only fairly recently retired and was a chief examiner for AQA. So we had excellence on that side creatively as well as academically. So I think through those years we were really well looked after. We didn't do dance GCSE though, which I thought was a bit of a shame. And when it came to A levels, there was a real question for me whether I went off to do a BTEC at Stratford College, which also has got a good reputation. I think Simon Pegg is a alumni of Stratford College, or stay at Stratford Grammar School for Girls. And I decided that I was going to stay at Stratford Grammar School for Girls because I had the opportunity to be head girl. And
just that one reason?
Not just all that reason. But I think there was a potential there to have a leadership role. And again, that's been another kind of trend, I suppose, early on from primary school, being games captain or things like that, where I've enjoyed those roles of responsibility and influence, and also being really open to the fact, although they can sound quite glamorous and all of that stuff, actually you're a servant to the student body in that sense, and you'll be reading out, the notices in assembly and stuff like that, not just going on amazing trips and representing the school and things like that. It's more kind of getting the student voice across, which I found really interesting, and representing. And I suppose again there's a bit of a through line with that. So sort of around my A levels, which were very artistically weighted. I did theatre studies, music and English literature. I did those to complement the training excellent training I was getting out of school in my local dance school. So that was sort of the combination of those. I think it's probably important to add here, and feel free to interrupt me at any point. I think it's important to add that I had come from a direct line of going hundreds of years back, agricultural labourers. And then it sort of gets to more sort of my parents, my grandparents' end of the ancestry. My dad worked for the local district council in environmental health as a pest control manager. And my mum was a PA to the chief executive at the district council as well. So their hobby really influenced me and my sister, who's a production manager in theatre too, quite heavily, because I think we saw how much fun they were having out of work and just thought, surely you can just do this as a job. And I guess sort of partly inspired by that. But I suppose it's important to note that, because although, yes, I went to a grammar school, it was very supportive, and I had these opportunities of going and training in dance in my local dance school, my dance teacher, Leslie, made sure that her classes were affordable, because having two public sector workers as parents, we weren't exactly flush for cash in that way. I mean, absolutely, they earned a solid, good living. But when I was decided to apply for professional training, there was no support, and people were remortgaging their houses to enable their children to go and train professionally at dance schools, because it was around £30,000 then, and we're talking about 20 years ago. Also in sixth form, because I love drama as well, and clearly I love talking, there was a real kind of grapple with, do I go to drama school or do I go to dance school? And I decided that I wanted to do dance training because of the physical element of it, which I loved, and the combining dance, drama and music all together, but also because of age and having that cultural unconscious wrong notion that it's only something you can do at the beginning of your career, and acting could be something that I could come back to. So again, looking at the kind of financial picture and pressure, it was then going for scholarships. And actually, just as I was started applying, the government came up with something called a Dance and Drama Award, which still are in existence today. And I was really lucky that I was able to be a recipient of that, because if I hadn't had that funding, I wouldn't have gone to train at Trinity Laban, which is one of the world's best conservatoires. There was just absolutely no way, particularly, you know, when my full degree could have been the same amount of salary that, you know, one of my parents was earning. It just was an absolute no-go. So Billy Elliot came out around the same time. And that is strikes a chord with most people who've trained in dance, particularly those of us who've come from a background where, you know, stumping up 30 grand for a degree is not a walk in the park. And I looked for extra funding as well through trawling through this massive book in the library like this for other sources of funding before we had, you know, the internet in the old days. And yeah, having that funding really changed everything. And I remember going to train. So my schedule from the get-go was pretty heavy. I'd finish school at 10 to 4, bike down to the studio, somewhat unhealthily probably inhale a sausage roll and a carton of Ribena before I got there, teaching maybe a bit to younger ones or assistant teaching, and then having my own classes. But I remember phoning up mum or dad to say, oh, can you just make sure I've got my bike today? How can we get picked up, or that kind of thing? And mum saying the letter's arrived. And I remember just so clearly, just open it. And knowing that I got a place, and then knowing that I got a scholarship, which actually came a couple of weeks later, was absolute game changer, and just, yes, I've done it. I can go and train, and incredibly exciting. And that year actually at Laban, as it was known then, it's now Trinity Laban because it's merged with Trinity College of Music, was a really interesting year. And a lot of us are still working 20 years on. And I think part of that is not only down to the quality of the training that we had, but because they were able to diversify the student population much more, and all sorts of jobs, performing, choreographing, producing, into management and senior leadership, all sorts of things, and still in contact with a lot of those people today. So yeah, I think sometimes can be a misconception that people kind of look at me, and because I'm quite a happy-go-lucky person and enthusiastic, that it's come quite easily. It absolutely didn't. And the reality of it not happening was pretty strong. The competition for those places, and then having worked at London Contemporary Dance School and seeing it from the inside, you're looking at 2,000 to 3,000 young people going for 60 to 100 places. And internationally, the competition is really tight. So yeah. So that was a very long-winded answer.
No, and I think that this is why I wanted to do it, because I think exactly what you said there, so many people perhaps see the end product, and it's the same when I interview a fighter pilot or an Olympic champion or whatever they do. They go, yeah, you see the last 0.1%.
Yes.
And there's a whole backstory to that. And I think something that opened my eyes to it when we first connected, kindly through Steve Ingham, actually, at your conference. And we were talking about the way in which your activity is set up in terms of the structure across this country. And you put us in touch with a team over in Ipswich, and myself and one of the guests we've actually got on in the next season, Dave Champion. We went down to the centre and spent a day down there and went into all the different rooms and met all the different teams. And even being somebody who's completely immersed in what I would consider quite a time heavy sport in swimming, and he's coached in the sport for like 30 years up to Olympic level, and we were both, our heads were blown off by the range of stuff, the athleticism, depending on which rooms you're in. It was incredible. And I think it's really nice to be able to, I guess, give the experience of someone who's been on that journey, kind of bring that story to life a little bit, especially for the youngsters out there that perhaps go, well, I like that, but what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the CAP program, or Centre for Advanced Training program, I was really privileged to be able to work on that program in the first 6 years that it was a thing. And up until that point, there'd been scholarships to the residential schools, so places like the Royal Ballet School, where it's boarding. I think there is day pupil option, but it's boarding. The idea that people could train to a level of excellence without having to leave their family unit or their school or that kind of thing was really attractive, again, in terms of increasing the amount of British applicants to conservatoires, but also upping the level of talent, and was so exciting because it was really pioneering. So sort of straight after uni, or college, I suppose we refer to it, I'd already been teaching a bit, and I started teaching at my local dance school from about 14. And then during my degree, just towards the end of it, I got the opportunity to work for an organisation called Wise Moves that goes into schools all over the country. And that kind of was an excellent way of me really to cut my teeth in terms of teaching all sorts of young people from all different backgrounds. I mean, one day I could be down in Cornwall in a state school, primary school. The next day I'd be in Norfolk at a private school. Another day I'd be in a PRU, like all sorts of places. And that experience combined with my own, then with the CAP program coming into existence, I had real empathy, because those children, it was all means tested, and it still is means tested. It's still a very successful program. And again, having had that experience of having means tested funding from the government to train, and training at a young age and starting my career at a young age, I could absolutely empathise with not only what the young people were going through, but also their parents, and the wide spectrum of different setups of families, and how the commitment to the art form, like you say, I mean, a lot of sports folk always say to me, oh, it's, physical load's quite heavy. It absolutely is. And I think our whole understanding over the last 10 years of how to approach that healthily, because particularly in dance, how we've learnt and how for example, ballet has developed and evolved over the years, has moved from more of a autocratic way of teaching to more interactive. And over the CAP programme, we were able to engage in some dance science research that had not been done before across all 10 centres, which was landmark. It was called Passion, Potential and Pathways. I hope I've got that in the right order. I'm sure Laban will correct me. But with that, we had a 3-year longitudinal study where we took data at the beginning of the academic year and the end of the academic year, looking at passive and active tests psychologically and physiologically about the impact their training was having, and really helping foster positive motivational climates, intrinsic motivation, all of those sorts of things, as well as the nuts and bolts of stuff we already thought we knew about, to really help support those young people go into long-lasting careers, and also helping them think holistically about their careers. That yes, we see the performer, and I'm sure the same with you guys in sport and swimming, you see the competition and competing bit, but underneath it is this humongous machine, which is so intricate, of all different aspects that really help support that young person or that athlete or artist in enabling them to do what they want to do. And also isn't the only end value thing. Working with lots of young people and seeing them develop, for me, was just as much of a buzz as getting applause when I was 8 on stage, probably more so. And as my career's developed working with specific populations, obviously now I'm working with dancing parents, but on the journey to that, working in dance for Parkinson's and dance for dementia, seeing how dance can be used not exactly as therapy to say, but more in terms of supporting people with those conditions, with their symptoms, as well as the social inclusion aspect, is wildly rewarding. And there's an alerting young people to all the different types of careers that they could have, and not just kind of the bog standard, oh, I'm seeing a performer, or seeing a teacher kind of thing. Really tapping into their other passions and blending them with what they could be doing is really exciting. And talent identification, absolutely still something that I'm connected to today. I'm currently working with the ISTD, which is the Imperial Society of Teachers of Dancing, which is mainly known as an examination board, but they have lots of other different facets to the organisation, including a level 6 teaching diploma, which is what I'm going to be lecturing on soon and mentoring on. And then helping Royal Opera House last year with their Chance to Dance programme in terms of project management, and helping roll that out to the West Midlands, obviously with the pandemic thrown in, but really helping identify talent at grassroots level and supporting those young people and their families to understand that there is a lot of potential for them to go into a career, and how that can be manifested if they choose to. Yeah.
Fantastic. And I'm curious, because obviously you talked a little bit around some of the threads and the seeds for what you're doing now kind of being sowed quite early on. So, you know, you've come out of your training, the world's your oyster. And at what point did where you are now kind of that journey start to become a little bit clearer, and your transition into this kind of the role of Dance Mama, and how all that built up? Like, at what point did that happen?
I think it's important to say for anyone watching, listening, that the coming out of that training and all of that structure, then before the journey to Dance Mama happened, felt like a massive precipice. And part of my journey towards that was trying to build programs or concepts so people didn't feel that way. I remember sitting by the South Bank in London thinking, what do I do now? Everything, there's been a really clear route. What do I do? And I guess that feeling of being empowered to build that bridge towards the next thing, or what that is, and helping young people feel that, is really important. And that's not actually too dissimilar to becoming a parent. So I became a parent in 2012 with my eldest child, my daughter, who's 8. And at that time, so I'd finished at the place, I'd probably taken about a year, and I'd probably been there for 6 years. I'd taken a step back from that because, quite frankly, I'd worked every Saturday for 6 years and I wasn't getting to see my own family. And I decided, how can I engage in this a bit more on my own terms in a freelance capacity? And during that time, I became pregnant. Now, the only thing that was available that I knew could support me was a fact sheet from One Dance UK, which is a bit like our advocacy body, a bit like Equity or those sorts of organisations, which does an incredible amount of advocacy, particularly this year with the pandemic and supporting the sector, but also does research. So there was a leaflet I could read about that, which is a bit like when someone dies and hands you a sheet of paper. It doesn't really touch the sides, shall we say. I also was really lucky that I was working at Rambert with my director at the time, Joss Giles. I always give a shout out to Joss. I'm sure he'll be excited by that. Who also was becoming a dad pretty much within a week on the same timescale as me. So I'd shown him on my phone very proudly my sonogram, and he was like, "Yeah, I've got one of those." And I was like, "You what?" So
a phone or a sonogram?
A picture of a sonogram on a phone. And yeah, we're not there with the tech net. I'm sure that's coming. And Joss was just incredibly supportive, and he's a brilliant lateral thinker. So I was involved in a 2012 project, sort of connected a little bit with the Olympics, or to do with that year through something called Big Dance, which was the dance world's way of celebrating 2012. And I was making a piece of work on my youth dance company at Rambert at the time called G2, that was to be performed on the balcony of the Royal Festival Hall as part of a promenade piece with several other youth dance companies at the time. And we were being mentored by the brilliant Kerry Nichols, who was a mum. And I had her in my life, thankfully, while I was pregnant, and another colleague called Melanie Precious, who's now CEO of an organisation called Greenwich Dance down in London, who I could go to for support and information and peer support. But coming out of the other side, in terms of post-birth and postnatally, apart from those connections that I had, and another colleague called Ellie Dowling, about how are you making this work, there wasn't anything. And I think there's a big gap anyway for parents, in terms of there's a lot of focus on the birth and not a great deal on afterwards. Probably, candidly, I would say you probably have more scrutiny owning a dog than you do having a parent. It's really strange. So I felt like I wanted to get this out cathartically. So I contacted One Dance UK and said, I want to write an article. Yes, the handout's amazing, but we need so much more. And I interviewed loads of colleagues, male, female, with young children that are grown up in all sorts of roles. And it was really their stories that I felt needed a platform. So I put them on a WordPress website and just sort of kept adding to them now and again, whilst I found my feet as a parent, as a freelancer, which, by the way, were crazy things like I thought I would go back to work at 3 months, but breastfeeding, or chest feeding as we should now refer to it, I didn't really quite appreciate that my daughter might have a different idea and not take a bottle until 6 months. Lots of things like that, where some of the jobs that I was hoping to do, or projects I was hoping to do, were actually, feeding your child wasn't an acceptable thing to do whilst you were working. Also having the social capital or network to support around that. So kind of moving through sort of the freelance stuff, that sort of steadily then came into being a project management role in the learning team at Rambert, again part-time, and I still sort of work part-time now. So for me, that's the balance between mumming and dancing that is good for me. I then became pregnant with my son, and Joss decided to move to Sadler's Wells. So that was just before I went on mat leave. So I watched Suffragettes. Thank you very much, Suffragettes. And I decided that I was going to put in an application for next level up in the organisation, which would be head of department. Thankfully, I got an interview for that. It was 8 days after I gave birth. I'm by no means the kind of winner at that kind of, not that it at all is a competition, but I think Mel, actually, who I mentioned earlier, beats me. I think she went for a role at 3 days after giving birth. Again, is it an ideal thing to be doing? Absolutely not. Is it a symptom of an industry that is fiercely competitive and has a, you know, proportion of opportunities that is smaller than the, you know, the actual workforce? Absolutely. So I interviewed over Skype, which is quite revolutionary 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, it wasn't Zoom. Zoom didn't even exist.
Wasn't even Zoom. And I was quite gung-ho, and I said, you know, I really want to do this role, but I want to do it as a job share. And I also want to take the first year off on mat leave. And luckily for me, that approach, combined, I'm sure, with a few other things, worked. And I got the role, which is great. So over that first year on mat leave, I actually, the organisation was going for another funding round with the Arts Council called National Portfolio Organisation. So I used my 10 keeping in touch days to help write the bid with my co-worker, my collaborator, or collaborator, shall I say, in that way, collaborator Julia Fitzell, and returned back into the actual workspace itself sort of August 2017. And there'd been a few changes with the management there. So it had a different feel to it. So I was really excited to go back, and they were very supportive of me in being a mum and having that flexibility. And usually kind of from this side of the fence, you would kind of work beyond 6 o'clock and get stuff done. And when you're a parent, you can't really do that. Had to down tools at 4 o'clock, commute back to Guildford and go and pick up the children, because also you have late fees. And quite frankly, if I was an hour late, I would lose a day's pay in late fees and all these sorts of things. And the organisation, Mark Baldwin, was brilliant and really had good empathy and understanding of that, because he knew I'd be able to do the job within the time available to the standard with which they required. But sort of humming in the background, Dance Mama is getting more and more momentum. And I thought, is it a book? So I went to an author's weekend that autumn and explored that, wrote a book proposal, all of this kind of stuff. And then I thought, hang on a minute, and put it in and all that kind of, but I thought it actually needs to be now. And let's migrate the website to something a bit more snazzy and friendly, user-friendly, and really start to cultivate it. And I guess a catalyst for that was a choreographer called Rosie Kay, who basically said to me, your website has really helped me navigate what on earth I'm going to do now as a parent and as an artistic director and a choreographer, and I'm really appreciative of that. And I thought, crikey, there's actually some legs in this, and there really is a lot of work to do. So I decided to step away from head of learning role and focus all of my energies on really making sure Dance Mama could offer all of the things that I believe that parents and dancing parents, and I mean that in the broadest sense, on and off stage, deserve. So that was cultivating a suite or an offer of things like, first of all, having somewhere to find information and latest information, then having a mentoring service. And actually that will circle back round to how we met, and Steve in a minute. So the Mentor Mama program, trying to kick on the research aspect of it, because we are still bereft of any dance science studies into dance and the pre and postnatal body. Specifically, it exists in about 15 pages in a textbook called Safe Dance Practice. That's it. Which barely scratches the surface. Again, brilliant, we've got it, but barely scratches the surface. It's just the start. And then also devising events or workshops or things like that where people could actually access training and opportunities that they couldn't before. So the original incarnation of that was the class program, which is curated content, because I was finding if Callie or Wilson were on a nap, I wanted to do a video and I couldn't find one quick enough, or I got some awful DVDs which were just terrible, and there was nothing in real life or the kind of that time factor that you can access quickly. And then also around that is the information side of it. And through my work, I was meeting fantastic individuals like yourself, like Steve, that I really wanted to connect people with. So Dance Mama Live originally was in real life at Sadler's Wells back in June 2019. And we were all set on course to put in an application and make that happen at Sadler's Wells on a monthly basis. And of course, the pandemic hit. So we took some time to work out how we could pivot that. And I think that's been the key through this whole pandemic, is resilience, but also flexibility, adaptability and creativity to really pivot things online. Which actually for the population that I'm working with sometimes works much better because they can get things on their own terms. So we devised a monthly programme of 2 hours a month on a Sunday morning where they can come live and for free. That most importantly, because a lot of people have been made redundant, furloughed or completely lost their jobs, to make it easy to engage, but also that there's replays. And that they can get that content when they're doing something else and really engage with it. So that has launched this week on International Women's Day, the 8th of March, and is available for people to sign up to. And again, engage in it on their terms. Absolutely. Do we want people there live? Yes, because you get the energy and the buzz and the accountability, and you can get that immediate feedback. But the replays are so vital, because I know from my own experience, I've got hours of content that I need to catch up on, that particularly in lockdown 3, there's just not that possibility really. So I guess that's the journey there. So it's very much driven from my own personal experience. But I think my awareness of dance and parenting along the way, I mean, I was kind of nicknamed the fertility stick at the place, because everyone who sat opposite me became pregnant at some point or another. So I think, and that awareness as a student, one of my lecturers who actually co-wrote Safe in Dance, Sonia Rafferty, became a parent and made work about it with another artist called Amanda Goff and lecturer. So the awareness was there, but probably before I became a parent, did I drop some clangers? I'm sure with my other colleagues who were parents about having ridiculous expectations. Do you want to come out for a drink at short notice? Absolutely no. Those sorts of things. And aside from those sort of more frivolous and fun things, it's also about educating employers as to the needs of parents, not just logistically and in terms of the legalities and all of that kind of stuff, systemic stuff, but what their physiological and psychological needs are. And not just for women, for men too. I had the privilege of interviewing Stephen McRae, who's principal at the Royal Ballet. He's got 3 children with Elizabeth Harrod, who's also She's just left the company, but she has a substantial career performing with a company as well. And, you know, the description of him trying to make sure he's got enough energy when he's in the studio with somebody as amazingly creative as Wayne McGregor, is, you know, 4 coffees and then missing your stop at the end of the night after a show because you're so freaking tired. And I think sleep deprivation is another area that spans across gender, because if you have children, they will steal your sleep generally in one way.
I was going to say that's a top secret, but I don't think I've met people who go after like 2 weeks, oh, they're sleeping fine, and I'm like, just you wait.
Yeah, I mean, even now, last night, aged 4, my son was up at 3, and I think there's also, particularly at this time as well, with the recalibration with schools going back, children's anxiety might present itself in interrupted sleep, or nightmares, particularly at this age, are quite normal. But the knock-on effect of that, particularly if you've been really energetic and productive and on it before becoming a parent, and then suddenly find yourself in a scenario where there was one day where I couldn't even remember putting shoes on to get to the car and looking down and thinking, oh my God, I've come out here barefoot, because you're so busy with the generation game-esque conveyor belt of, have I remembered the child? Have I remembered nappies, extra milk?
The cuddly toy.
Exactly. I think it's part that impairment in the hippocampus, maybe, as well as just the volume of, almost at times it felt like trying to learn a language with no lessons, which is hardcore. And I think there should be more knowledge around it to really prepare people. Again, it might put people off, helping David Attenborough out there, but also in the reality of just giving them more preparedness to be able to have reasonable expectations on themselves. And that's another kind of speciality, shall we say, of dance folk psychologically. We have a tendency towards perfectionism because you're fed a low, and I'm sure this kind of links potentially with sport too, you're given messages and ideals from a really early age of what success looks like, and it's usually unattainable. And that transfers across in some very unhelpful ways when you're trying to execute a part of your life which essentially is messy and chaotic, and the notion of having any control over what happens logistically, as well as what your children will be doing and their behaviour, as well as somebody carrying a child, the changes that happen in your body can be really unhelpful. And that's something, again, that I think can be very particular to the population that I work with, but also those sports women included, sports people included, who have a physical reliance on in their career. I guess that's where my work with Active Pregnancy Foundation comes in. And during lockdown 1, having my other half at home and actually having a bit more time, because he travels quite a lot with his job in tech, gave me the opportunity. There was an opportunity that arose for a studentship at Canterbury for a PhD in sports and exercise sciences. So finally I thought, brilliant, maybe I can help fill the gap here. Sadly, I was pipped at the post, but I did get down to the last 6, I think, for that. Mushrooms won out, I think, on that one with a biologist, which is fine. And through that process, I was encouraged to apply by Dr. Marlies DeVivo, who actually had set up Active Pregnancy Foundation with Sally Kettle, which has become a charity over the pandemic, which is an amazing achievement for themselves, but also in the fact that they have managed to create CMO approved activity guidelines for the general populace pre and postnatally. So that kind of level of impact is already being felt. as well as all of the work that they've been doing at Canterbury with a research group that looks at pre and postnatal activity, elite running and white papers on those sorts of things, as well as having an amazing scientific advisory board, which I'm the secretariat to, which has an array of brilliant experts who work across activity, Royal College of Midwives, IVF, gynecology, physio, all sorts of things that have connections with the IOC or the Premier League. So all of that information absolutely drip feeds across to Dance Mama, and is what I hope to really help people access with the webinar element of the programme through people like Dr. Steve Ingham, who will be leading the first webinar on the 28th of March. And probably now is a good time for very long and scenic route to talking about how we met, Kevin.
Yeah, it was. And the funny thing is with Steve is, I'm probably quite naive as most young entrepreneurial kind of people are, and I just reach out and have a chat with people. And I remember listening to Steve interviewing Jess Ennis-Hill after her second run at the Olympics, and obviously coming back from being a parent and then going on and winning a medal. So obviously a fantastic ambassador for the sort of things we're talking about, obviously at an elite performance level. And I remember I wasn't too long into my last job, and I remember sending him an email saying, "Oh, hi Steve, had a few kind of mutual connections," and said, "Oh, I'm starting up this project in swimming and looking at doing this, this, and this." And that afternoon, my phone rings, and we probably spent an hour just bouncing around these ideas. And I need to speak to this person and that person. And one of the persons he mentioned that would be really cool to speak to from a parent's point of view was yourself. And then obviously came to his conference, what feels like a lifetime ago, maybe 2 years ago now. I've lost all perception of time.
Wasn't it amazing?
Oh, absolutely brilliant.
I think for both of us, and I know I'm slightly speaking for you here, but for me, that supercharged me at a time where I was just kind of, again, stepping back out of the traditional structure and going into building. And absolutely, I think back to that conference quite often. And again, the amazing array of speakers that he had that weren't just in sports or activity, that they went beyond that even now kind of pop into my mind for different reasons, and really help really fuel what I've been able to do since 2018. I mean, it was just extraordinary. And also being at the Olympic Stadium is just such a great place, isn't it? It's got such a wonderful energy to it. And I'm sure it was a lot of hard work for them. They might not have such rose-tinted view on it as we did. But you're absolutely right. That connection with Dame Jess Ennis-Hill was totally where I got connected with Steve, because in that last year at Rambert, one of the dancers, Lucy Balfour, who has an amazing career, she did 10 years with a Royal New Zealand Ballet before 5 years at Rambert, was pregnant, and she knew I was doing Dance Mama on the side, and she came for me to support and for support, and it enabled me to devise my blueprint, I suppose, in terms of mentoring people through that process. And I remember clearly sitting at my desk in the office going, well, let's have a think outside the box. Who else is there who are elite athletes, who are mums, who are doing amazing things? Jess Ennis-Hill. So that night, similar, in a not too dissimilar way to you, I was then looking up who her team was on the sofa, and then looking them up in LinkedIn. And the next day, I got a message from Steve saying, "I've seen you looking. I love what you're doing. Can I help?" And I remember being in the kitchen going, oh my, like, is this for real? So we organised for him to come and do a podcast with Lucy and support her and give her some information. But I remember having a conversation with him, again, for about an hour. He's so generous and wonderful, in a cafe at Waterloo Station, where he talked me through how to support somebody during that process. And that's absolutely what we were able to recreate at One Dance UK in Leeds in 2018. So I left Rambert in the October, and within a month, managed to get a spot at the kind of industry conference talking about parenting, and having Steve there as well, who delivered the most sublime keynote speech. It was an absolute blinder. And recreate that conversation for the 26 odd delegates there. And that's always been a conversation that is so inspiring and enlightening, because up until this point we're kind of fed the misinformation that your body can't recover, which is rubbish. It absolutely can, but it does take time and effort, and those are not easy things to and finance, and they're not easy things necessarily to come by as a freelancer on, I know, 20 grand a year or something. So it needs support. But also in the changes in your body, using them positively and not seeing them as your body's broken and you can't do this anymore. And yes, you might choose not to go back, return to performing. Some people do, some people don't, but it's changing that culture of thinking that, you know, that you can't, that it can't be done, because it absolutely can. It just takes, you know, TLC and effort and support to make that happen on a few fronts that, yeah, as I've said, are a bit of a challenge. So Steve was just absolutely brilliant. And even before Dance Mum Alive becoming the entity it is now online, like you have, Kevin, he's so brilliant. You can shoot him an email and he'll respond and give you an idea, or invite you to kind of pitch in on some of his ideas, you know, with his amazing work that he's doing with young people. And yeah, he's just fantastic. Was I also naive into really understanding how many amazing people he's worked with in sport? Totally. Totally. And I think actually that was probably quite helpful, because I think I probably would have felt even more intimidated and daunted speaking to him. But now I just feel a bit daft. So, and I can live with that.
I think I find that interesting. And I've had this discussion recently. I do quite a lot of talks around the podcast journey, so the lessons I've learned from it, and then I share it with like young athletes that are trying to find their way in the world. And one of the things they say is often they see the face or the name or whoever it is in their achievement, and they just see that. And I say, what's fascinating is the more you explore people's journeys, within about 30 seconds, you get past that. Yeah. And actually, that's what's so fascinating, is actually it doesn't matter whether you're shooting for an Olympic gold medal, you know, you're working for the English Institute of Sport, you're working in these incredible dance environments. We're all on a journey as a human being. And at some point, there's going to be intersections where there's a story, there's a moment, there's, you know, like you were talking about when you got that letter and you opened it. Yeah. So many young people can relate to that, whether it's getting their exam results or passing their driving test or whatever it is. And I think the more of those things we can have, and especially on the journey as a parent, to hear there is life beyond that, because almost I think perhaps historically, not so much now, but there was this kind of professional route and then you became a parent, and it's
yeah. And there still is that concern now, and it's an attitude that we're working really hard, and not just me. I mean, I'm just one part of a group of a movement, I suppose, that's trying to change that. But I can remember actually around the conference, not actually at it, but I remember showing somebody a photo of the landing page with a picture of Tara Brigitte Bhavani, who's a principal at the Royal. And again, there's quite a few of those stories, because it's a well-resourced organisation that had, you know, Greg Rutter managing the health suite at one time, you know, where they've got excellent staff and facilities and a big body and a company of dancers to enable maternity leave to happen really flexibly, not on a particular time frame. But that image of her on point in what we call an arabesque, which is where you lift your leg up at the back with a bump. I can remember somebody being really horrified that I was, is that safe? Yes, actually, yes, it is.
Because, and we've got some of the best sports scientists in the world telling you, yes, it's safe, and this is how you do it. And then instead of an unattainable image, if you like, you go, there's that. And if you're just starting that journey, here's what this, and this looks like, and we're going to help you.
And normalizing it. I think that's normalizing it, and not just the aesthetic of that, the making time doable, making schedules doable for parents in terms of the other responsibilities that they have, because I think up until that point, dance usually has been number one, maybe sometimes a little bit unhealthily and obsessively. It's there, and it's kind of the top thing that you're worried about. And then suddenly in comes a role, or maybe not necessarily suddenly, but in comes a role that supersedes that. And that's quite a challenge to grapple with, basically, as that person, as that parent, as well as the surrounding, employee organisation around that. And particularly when, again, we're in an oversubscribed industry where you have so many people who want to be working, and then the opportunities, particularly now, are really slim. And that's why I guess I feel I have a duty to ignite people in creating their own opportunities and being entrepreneurs. And that expresses itself through, I have a couple of programs which are about portfolio management of your own in terms of being an artist, and also project management and capitalizing on your discipline in your dance career and moving that across more administratively and project managemently to make stuff work for you, basically.
It sounds like one thing I'm keen to ask, and I try and ask all our guests, if you could go back, let's say the 8-year-old, when you landed that first, professional piece of work, what would you say to yourself knowing everything you know now? Sorry to put you on the spot.
It's such a good question, isn't it? It's such a good question. I'd probably say, don't get too worried that it isn't going to happen. The career will come. You will be able to engage in this. And I think that was a genuine thing of like, am I going to be able to follow a professional career even at 8? And I actually knew then that actually the acting thing would probably be less prevalent than the dance stuff, but I love being in that performing and just the environment of that organisation. And I have a lot of love for the Royal Shakespeare Company, even now, a lot of love for them. But yeah, I think it would be, try not to worry too much and think you've got to do everything super, super fast and cram it all in. There will be time, and give that space, and just to have that confidence that actually the background that I came from wasn't necessarily going to be a barrier to going into that, because I think absolutely until those scholarships were available, and even at that age I kind of started researching about those pathways, that that would be possible. Yeah,
that's fantastic. That's a really nice way to pull it all together, because I think so many people are probably in the earlier part of this journey, whatever sport they're in, and especially for parents that have got siblings doing different sports, it can almost feel like we're talking about it from a dance point of view, but there's actually probably people there going, I've got somebody that wants to dance, but I've also got somebody that's doing this. How do I do it all? And it's like, this is kind of what we're getting at.
No, absolutely. And it's juggling all of that. And I think there is a relationship between sports and dance in terms of the programs, not just our relationship, but I think lots of those connections where we do dovetail and have empathy. I mean, particularly I remember some students on the CAP program being very good at athletics or going into sports careers as opposed, and following that route as opposed to dance, because having that physical literacy was going to enable them to do multiple things, and also kind of other strange things would happen, like they would all, a lot of children talented in dance wave their hands around a lot. That's something we'd look for. That's something we look for at interview stage. Are they moving their hands a lot to speak? It's usually one, or breaking lamps at home because they're too energetic. That's another one. But also being really good at music or science or mathematics, those sorts of things would be quite commonalities in other areas that they would be gifted in. And yes, usually people have talents in more than one area, but it's really choosing which one you care about and you're passionate about the most, because you have to go back to that passion to get you through years like we've had this year, and to fuel that resilience. It has to be the love for the sport or the art form that's going to get you through the tougher moments, as well as super enjoy brilliant high points like the luxury of being on this podcast.
Well, that was a wonderful way to round us off, Lucy. It's been really, really enjoyable, and we'll make sure we include all of the links in our show notes and the follow-up event to everything that's going on, because there is so many exciting things in the pipeline. So thank you so much for your time today. I really, really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. And just thank you for having this amazing podcast that is really lifting the lid on all of those things that happen underneath the iceberg to make that happen. And I think that's a really important role to be playing, especially now when I think so many young people can feel a bit disillusioned having, school on and off. I think it's extraordinary and just really interesting listening and inspiring listening anyway. So thank you, Kevin.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thank you there, Lucy, for an insightful discussion, a really eye-opening conversation of the challenges that exist in the dance world, and as a parent too. Make sure you check out the show notes, as we've included the links to Lucy's website, her podcast, her Twitter, Instagram and Facebook pages. She's super active on social media and always brings some positivity to the digital space, as you can probably tell from our conversation today. So, we're now underway with our 6th season, and we will continue picking up exciting things in the coming weeks. Next Tuesday, we'll be going live at 7 p.m. UK time with a fellow podcaster, talking about our respective podcast lessons from our 2020 shows. Check out @RoadMonkeyPod on Instagram for more info on that. Next week, we're speaking to another really inspiring lady, as we're joined by Women's Super League star Amy Palmer, who shares with us some honest reflections on what it's like forging a career in women's professional football. Have a great week, everyone, and thanks for joining us for the Road Monkey Podcast.